serious action, and that's what the public wants.
Yeah.
Andy, I'm getting the feeling Tom wasn't moved by the Episcopal bishop at National Cathedral.
As an Episcopalian, welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, January 23rd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, Tom, Trump addressed the Davos World Economic Forum today, Thursday. He talked about ending the Russia-Ukraine war. He talked about OPEC lowering its prices, and he talked about tariffs. So here's a little bit of what he said.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
So I like that it's your prerogative. That was a nice touch. What did you make of the address?
Well, it's his favorite word, the most beautiful word, right? Tariffs. He loves them. Look, it's tough it is tough to discern. Trump is a master negotiator. He's been doing this all his life, and and he seems pretty. Is this just an opening gambit for him, or is this a hard line? We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But there's no question that he's going to impose tariffs. They are going to now. Will it be across the board? I doubt it. I think a lot of his advisors think that's a bad move, but tariffs can be useful as a tool. Not only an economic tool, but a diplomatic tool to get people to sort of do, what you want. And so it's going to be an important part of his arsenal here as he gets going. And look, I think at the end of the day, why Trump has gotten so much, why he's made such a connection with the American people is he always, we're getting ripped off. And there is something to the idea that, we've just been open for business. Meanwhile, we can't export things to other countries without paying tariffs, and it's not fair trade, right? It's free trade, but it's not fair trade. And I think trying to get that balance more in line, I think, is not a bad thing at all.
Carl, what do you think that these are world leaders? This is sort of the global elite there at Davos. It's been going on, I think, for 55 years. But what do you think they make of Donald Trump?
They have to be, privately appalled, but they can read the election returns too, and they realize they have to do business with this guy. There was a time, I think it was Reykjavik. It's in one of my father's books about Reagan, where the Soviet apparatchiks around Mikhail Gorbachev were denigrating Reagan, and he interrupts him. He says, he's the president, elected president of the United States of America," and it was a sort of a kind of a heartwarming scene there for a minute, and these people, Trump's the duly elected president of the United States of America, elected twice, and so they're going to have to deal with him, and they're going to have to take him more seriously than they did before. I get that, but he doesn't always make it easy. I mean, there's things about Tom's talking about tariffs and actually more coherently than Trump does. He doesn't really give a rationale for why he wants to do this. He seems to think that if you have a trade imbalance, that is ipso facto proof that you are cheating, but that's not necessarily the case. He's not telling these people to dismantle their barriers. He's basically saying, if you don't come to America and build stuff here, I'm going to impose tariffs. How's Canada supposed to do that? How's the oil industry in Alberta supposed to relocate to Montana? I mean, the thing at some level makes no sense, except, and I hope Tom's right, as a negotiating ploy.
Yeah.
All right. But the other thing I was struck by, Andy, in his televised speech to Davos was the Ukraine war. The question was asked directly to him by the CEO of Davos. Next year at this time, he said, "You'll be here." I guess Trump had indicated he would come next year, and will the war in Ukraine be over by then? And he kind of filibustered. He didn't say yes to that. He said, as he said on the campaign trail here in the United States, that war wouldn't have ever happened if he were president. He didn't say why that was so. He said, he'd said during the campaign that war will end before I take office. He said he had a plan for day one. He was very vague about this, and sort of mumbled something about the Chinese could help with this process. He said they have a lot of power in the region. I assume he meant influence with the Kremlin, but he didn't say that. And then he went off about this thing he's been saying in the last 3 days about how there's the civilian deaths in Ukraine are much higher than people say. I don't know why. And then he goes through this thing about apartments and gets into this kind of conversation as a real estate man. There's more people living in those apartments than you might realize. And it was a long rambling, as rambling as I'm being now, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. a good
so
synopsis of a
okay.
ramble there. Well, the other day, earlier this week, Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan, talked about tariffs, and I think he kind of rivaled Tom in terms of the coherence on this topic. So, but very interesting to hear what Jamie Dimon had to say. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Look, I look at tariffs. They are an economic tool. That's it. They're an economic weapon. Depending on how you use it and why you use it and stuff like that. And people argue, is it inflationary and non-inflationary? I would put in perspective, if it's a little inflationary, but it's good for national security, so be it. I mean, get over it. National security trumps a little bit more inflation, but I think the question is how they get used. Can they be used to bring people to the table? Yes. Is there some unfair trade? Yes. Is there some state-owned subsidies? Yes. Is the president going to use that way in his team? Yeah, and we'll see. But how it gets played out, we're going to find out.
Pretty succinct statement there from Jamie Dimon, who I will point out was a classmate of mine at Tufts University about 100 years ago. But
you made just as much money as he did.
Yeah, that's right. This podcast has put me ahead, I think, of Jamie. But Tom, it's pretty interesting because he about a year ago said some favorable things about Trump voters and got some flack for that. And here he is sort of talking about tariffs as being now a national security tool. And I think his point is that if it improves our national security, it might be worth a little inflation. It might be worth a little bit of a tax on the American people. It's just a very different view than you hear from most mainstream economists.
Yeah, and Jamie Dimon has been sort of, a few steps ahead of a lot of his colleagues on Wall Street. He seems to have a better, more now. Maybe he's just a smoother operator and is trying to, stay ahead of the trends. But you're right. I mean, he was telling people last time, look, don't dismiss Trump voters, don't dismiss Donald Trump. When a lot of his folks on Wall Street were continuing to, basically malign Trump and his policies and all that. And so I think Jamie Dimon has been, I don't want to say a voice of reason necessarily, but he has, I think, recognized and tried to, I think, influence people to move to the middle. And this is another example. I mean, he's not just, a lot of times the reflexive answer, tariffs are terrible, they're bad, can't do them. And that's not, it's more nuanced than that. And he seems to get that. And I think that's how the Trump administration is approaching it.
Yeah. Well, Carl, do you think there'll be a rethinking of tariffs among the Davos set?
Maybe, but not in this little corner of the universe. I still.
Carl is the ultimate Davos man. I haven't thought about that, but it's true. He is.
Got the corduroy jacket on.
I'll say two things. Jamie Dimon knows a lot about finance, and as you point out, Andy, and Tom, both of you, he's been kind of attuned to what's going on in the moment politically in this country, and I respect that. But he pretty blasé about a little bit of inflation. We just had an election where, the best I can tell, the Democrats lost because of two reasons. One, they essentially opened up the southern border, and two, they didn't really deal with inflation very well. So there's a political cost to inflation that politicians who stand for elected office have to take into account. And the other thing I would say is that, listen, this tariffs thing, everything, I don't disagree with anything he said or really what you guys have been saying, but the problem with tariffs is that where do they end? then there's retaliation. This is what the great lesson of 1930, when Smoot-Hawley tariff was passed. The idea was the Depression is that we had to just build things in America and it would make the Depression less and it would go away. Would ensure that it became a global depression. And that's the lesson. And none of the dynamics of that have changed in, 95 years. The other countries may do this too. And Trump seems to realize this. And you notice that pitch today was a little different than he said before. Come to America, you can build your plants here and you'll be okay. So he's still a globalist in terms of, economic policy, but he's also a nationalist in terms of, he wants what's right for the American people. Yeah. So it's an interesting message, but I don't think we should get too carried away and think that tariffs are a good thing.
Yeah. Well, he's proposed 10% tariffs on China, 25% duties on Mexico and Canada. He plans to announce it all, I guess, on February 1st. So we're going to keep an eye on this and see what happens. But we'll find out. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Congress passed the Lake and Riley Act yesterday, Wednesday. It requires Homeland Security to deport illegal immigrants accused of any crime, including shoplifting. There are 1,500 more troops headed to the border. There's a new directive at the Justice Department aimed at state and local officials who resist federal immigration law. Tom, what do you make of the rapidity with which Trump is moving on the immigration front?
It shows that it is a priority of his and of this administration. It is, as Carl mentioned in the last segment, one of the reasons he won the election. And so it's no surprise. And the guy that he put in charge of it, by the way, Tom Homan, is he is, does not suffer fools. I mean, this guy is about as blunt and hard-nosed as you can imagine. And so he's gotten to work. And they've already, I saw a number, hundreds of arrests already of people, illegal immigrants who have committed crimes, and they're rounding them up and going to kick them out of the country. I think this is what the American people voted for. And, Trump is going to deliver on that promise that he made. And we'll see, how it goes and the optics of it and all that. I'm sure there's going to be, I was joking earlier, just wait until my mayor, Brandon Johnson, gets arrested by Tom Homan's troops for trying to, protect Chicago and keep it a sanctuary city. That's going to be that'll be a fun moment. And I don't know what the odds are of that happening, but it's not zero. Let's put it that way.
Well, Carl, Tom anticipated my question for you, which is there a point, or do you see the point where there is a serious backlash against this? And I'm not talking about just sort of complaints on the edge, but where people say, okay, that and no further. And
well, yeah. And it's written right into this law. This idea that you would name this law after this poor college student is raped and murdered by, Venezuelan gang member who had no business being in this country, no business being in Georgia. And the Biden administration wouldn't own up to their mistakes there. That made voters mad, and should have made them mad, made me mad. But then you write a law in her name and you include property crime, theft. So the answer to your question is it's Victor Hugo wrote it a couple of centuries ago. It's in Les Mis. Yeah, when an immigrant steals a loaf of bread to feed her kids, and the Trump administration says she has to be deported, that's when the momentum will start to shift. I think putting theft, simple property theft in that bill was a mistake. On the other hand, the other side of that is, I'm from California, and California essentially legalized shoplifting. And they didn't mean to do that exactly. They meant to decriminalize this, when somebody's going in there, high on weed and take some Twinkies. They don't want them to, they have 2 previous crimes under California's 3 strikes and you're outlaw. These people go to prison for life. That's what they were voting against. Well, what they got was basically organized crime. Now, using cell phones, these mobs swarm these stores, empty, steal everything in sight. Well, every person there only steals $900, right? But anyway, let's say that's right. But then they go to another store and they basically legalize stealing. That's the context in which this statute is written, is why it's put in there. But it seems to me the pendulum, we got to get the pendulum right in the middle. We keep sort of veering wildly on criminal justice.
Well, you haven't, hold on. This is just happening. Maybe the Trump administration, maybe Tom Homan, maybe they're not going to be arresting, people for stealing a pack of gum or something. I mean, obviously there are a lot of illegal immigrants in this country who have committed more serious violent offenses, and they're starting with them, and that could take, a long time just to get that done.
Right.
Well, that's going to be very popular. These people who come to this country and commit violent crimes, or have committed violent crimes from, Trump said that these countries, Venezuela, emptied their prisons. There was no real evidence of that, but a lot of these people who came here did have felony records. Why were they, what are they doing here? That's what American people want to know. And as long as they stick to violent criminals, I mean, this thing will be very popular for a while. Yeah.
Well, Jamie Raskin said this about it. He said, all this sound and fury on day one and week one, but nothing to bring down grocery prices.
Did he really say that?
Yeah, he really said that.
That's awesome.
About immigration. Anyway, I mean, is
Jamie Raskin's the one, by the way, who said, if you accept a pardon, that's admission of guilt.
Right. Yeah.
He hasn't said that since he himself was pardoned, I've noticed.
But I do wonder about Tom, birthright citizenship, for example, which I saw some recent polling on this from the AP, and people are sort of more for birthright citizenship than I would have imagined. It's about 50% are for it, and only about 20% are against it, and the rest don't have a position. But is that going to be something that will prove controversial? Because there's already, court challenges to that, of course.
Yeah, it might. I mean, that might be an political loser for the Trump administration. Again, we'll have to wait and see. Look, there's no question though that if you look at the polling data over the last 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, probably since when Trump first took office, but certainly in the last 4 years, the public sort of tolerance for tougher immigration enforcement measures has gone up, and that's a direct. This is all happening because Joe Biden and the Democrats threw open the southern border and then lied about it to the American people for years. I mean, and
only 4 years.
Only 4 years, and let in 10 million people. I mean, it changed the entire dynamic of how the public thinks about immigration. And then you have these crimes like Lincoln Riley and others, and suddenly the public is like, enough, stop. Do whatever you have to do to make this stop. And so the pendulum is swinging back now. And to Carl's point, eventually it'll get to a point, maybe the Trump administration will push it to a point where it'll touch against, it'll go too far and the public will have backlash, and they'll end up somewhere in the middle. But at least for right now, the administration is taking serious action, and that's what the public wants.
Yeah.
Andy, I'm getting the feeling Tom wasn't moved by the Episcopal bishop at National Cathedral.
As an Episcopalian, I know where she was coming from, and I'm not going to.
I find it so condescending for someone like that. These liberals, who's going to wash our toilets and clean, cut our lawns and have mercy for the people who are, taking out our garbage. I mean, it's so condescending. I don't get it.
Tom, that's not quite the spirit of it. I think what people mean when they say that is these people are working hard, and a lot of them are doing jobs that are hard to get native born Americans to fill anymore, in our service economy, and that they're necessary.
Say that.
Okay. That's what I think they're saying. That's what I hear that's what I hear.
I hear them say like, well, who's going to pick our vegetables? And who's, it's like, I digress.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? We're going to leave it right there, guys. You've stumped me on this one. I was not prepared to sort of have a position the Episcopalian minister. But anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And Carl, we have news out of the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge. Vivek Ramaswamy is out. Apparently, he will announce next week that he's running for governor of Ohio. Reporting in the Wall Street Journal says Ramaswamy and Elon Musk were at odds. So what do you make of this split among the tech bros?
Well, if you watched Vivek Ramaswamy during the primary season, I always stumble over that word because Trump didn't even participate and he won. So was it really a primary? But it was. These were primary elections. And Vivek Ramaswamy had an unusual talent for irritating people. Everyone on the stage, they couldn't decide whether they wanted to go after Trump or kiss Trump's fanny or be nice to each other or just talk about Joe Biden, but they knew they wanted to, they all knew, and they would look and you'd see them, the body language. When Vivek started talking, their jaws would steel. It became, I thought Nikki Haley was going to punch him a couple of times. He has this strong personality, and I guess he's an acquired taste. I'm sure his family loves him. I'm sure I'm not sure. Maybe he has many good friends, but he's a pushy young guy and he's a man in a hurry. And we predicted this on this show that he and Elon Musk clash, and apparently that has happened. Yeah.
Well, Carl, do you think it's so? One theory is that there was a difference about how to approach Doge, and that Musk wanted to cut spending while Ramaswamy wanted to cut regulation and bureaucracy.
I've heard that. Those are not mutually exclusive. This was a personality clash. Let's just be honest.
Well,
it raises the question, Andy, and I'll throw it out to this group right here. Mm-hmm. What's the over/under on when Elon Musk and Donald Trump can no longer coexist? And it won't be Trump leaving the administration. And you have to say a holiday. So, is it by July 4th? Is it by St. Patrick's Day? Tom, you can go first. Over under on Elon Musk and Trump's divorce. Can be November. Could be the Super Bowl in 4 years. Tom, anytime you say.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to last a while, actually. I would say Thanksgiving of next year.
Wow.
Tom thinks this is a very
playing the long game.
Secure marriage.
Gee.
I could be over tomorrow.
I have the opposite. I say Valentine's Day
of this year.
Yeah, this year.
That's
I
3
think,
weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. I think that's like because I measure thing in Trump time.
Yeah,
and that's a lifetime. And for these two guys to keep it together for that long.
All right, I'll say St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, Tom took the safe bet because if
Oh no! Look, I went third. I could have split the difference.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
One in 3 weeks, 1 in 4 years. I could have said July 4th.
But it is an interesting question though of the bromance between Donald Trump and Elon Musk seems to be still sort of going strong. Vivek was the guy who, he had been supportive of Trump during the primaries, and but he was, Trump was trying to find a spot for him and couldn't really find a place for him to land, and was kind of like, okay, go do this Doge thing. And so he was kind of almost an afterthought in a way. Mm-hmm. And so, look, we'll see. I mean, he has ambitions, and so maybe running for governor ends up being a good thing for him. But
do we have polling yet?
We have no polling on that yet. Oh. But I do think, look, Donald Trump and Elon Musk have, you remember when, after the election where Trump was giving his speech and he said, Elon loves it here. He's at Mar-a-Lago. He's like, I can't get rid of the guy. But they seem to have continued and all the way up through the inauguration. And Musk was a featured speaker, obviously, and was jumping around and I
waving his hands.
Democrat, you think he was,
Trump
Hitler.
he's not going to get rid of him this week because Trump's finally, somebody's being called Hitler other than Trump. So Trump's happy.
But I do think that that it's going to last for a while, and we'll see how it goes. If there's bad news out of Doge, if they're not effective, or there's some sort of scandal, or the opposite happens, if Elon Musk is being a superstar and getting all the press, that could rub Trump the wrong way too. So he's got to kind of, keep his head down and do his job, and we'll see whether he's able to get some results.
Tom, you've reminded me. Remember you guys when COVID hit, Trump, who didn't quite know what to make of it. I mean, nobody did. He put Mike Pence in charge of the task force, and Pence started holding these briefings at the White House. They didn't last very long, a week or two, and he was doing real well. Pence was, and getting a lot of press. And then Trump started just
too much press,
showing up at the briefings and doing the briefings himself, and sort of winging it, and wasn't following the issue in the early days, just saying stuff. And that's where that bleach comment came, from. He was just sort of winging it. But he doesn't like other people to get press, and Elon's getting press. On the other side of that, what Trump really respects is billionaires, self-made guys. And there is no denying Elon Musk's genius at making money and building things. I mean, he's a person, if you took politics out of it, just sort of obviously worthy of respect. And so I think he has a little of that going for him too.
Yeah, well, there's this other aspect to this, though, that which is one of the reasons why I'm betting on a short romance. When this was, Musk has already thrown cold water on Stargate, this $500 billion deal to build artificial intelligence that, Trump announced that with great fanfare. Musk came out almost immediately and sort of, peed all over it, saying that the partners don't have the money. That can't endear him to Trump. And then he doubled down on it Wednesday. He dubbed Stargate a fake, and he called Sam Altman a swindler. I mean, that can't
he hates Sam Altman.
Yeah.
Musk hates Sam Altman. They're in like a death match,
Right. But my point is that if when Trump is announcing his biggest thing in the Oval Office, or maybe he wasn't in the Oval, he was in the White House, it's not even 24 hours, and he's literally pissing all over it.
Well, and you realize how savvy Sam Altman is, because he said the one thing he had to say to be on the stage. He turned to Trump and said, "We couldn't have done this without you."
Right.
Well, so take that, Elon.
Well, I guess we'll find out. I do think, though, it's worth thinking a little bit about Ramaswamy's future. Do you think that would be a good role for him and a good stepping stone to be a governor? I mean, there's actual, responsibility. You just have to run things. And he might be good at it. Who knows, right, Tom?
Maybe city councilman first.
Carl, okay, for any of our listeners or viewers who are tuning in for the first time, or maybe haven't been with us that long, you can go back in our archives and you can listen to Carl talk down about Vivek Ramaswamy since the day he announced for president. Carl thinks he's unqualified, and the Pete Buttigieg of the GOP 2020.
Yeah, I wasn't big on Mayor Pete either 4 years ago, was I?
No. So anyway, Carl does not like Vivek, just for everybody, just to set the score.
It's not personal.
Well, anyway, listen, we'll see whether he hasn't been in that kind of position before. And so, I mean, he's obviously got some private experience, leadership experience, but I think part of what makes a good governor is being able to work with other people, and I don't know if Vivek's got that. I mean, certainly what we just saw with Doge and what we saw in, I guess the GOP primary is a little bit different because you're really trying to beat the other guy's brains out. But we'll see. I mean, it might not be a good position for him, and he's a guy in a hurry. But JD Vance is the one who's in pole position. I mean, you think about Trump, and JD Vance, will inherit the nomination to run for president, could be president for another 8 years, in which case Vivek will still be, he'll still be young enough to have, give it another go if he wants to, but certainly he he didn't accomplish what he wanted to in 2024. I mean, he wanted to be the number 2 guy, and that's not where he is.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem, Carl, that this was remarkably short-lived, this co-head, this dual head of Doge. Was it doomed from the start just because you can't have 2 big egos like this running something like this, and it was a stupid thing to try?
That's right.
It's like this podcast. We have these 2 big egos right here.
No, we have these 3 big egos. So, but the thing is that, I was actually going to say, be serious for a minute and say, we have this podcast and one person's in charge of it and we get along great, but we're not like Vivek and Elon. And there's something to what Tom said, though. Is there no agency he could have actually given Vivek? I mean, Buttigieg got transportation, not that he knew anything about transportation, but he'd run in the primaries. He endorsed Biden quickly when it came time to do that. And, he got the reward that you usually get in party politics. Vivek Ramaswamy didn't get anything like that. So he may be a man.
Trump should have made him ambassador to New Zealand or something, like Carol Mosley Braun. Just
no, Australia. He could go after them on their woke stuff. He would have so much fun doing that.
Well, hopefully the White House is listening. Maybe they've got a position for Ramaswamy someplace in the administration. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break, but don't go away. When we come back, Carl is going to talk to Juan Williams of Fox News. He's got a new book out. Very interesting stuff, so don't go away. We'll return right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics. Talking now with an old friend, Juan Williams. Juan's a columnist, political columnist, a veteran White House correspondent. He covered the White House with my dad, actually, at the Washington Post back in the day. And he's a commentator on Fox News. He's much in demand because he's one of these guys who actually lets the reporting inform his judgments, not the other way around. And Juan's written a new book, New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. Welcome, Juan. Thanks for doing this.
Carl, I was so taken by your introduction because you knew me when I had some hair.
Well, my hair's thinning too. All right, my friend.
I really appreciate that.
Tell us about the new book. Let's just get right into it.
Sure. So this new book, as you said, New Prize for These Eyes. In some ways, it's an extension of a book I wrote. And again, this speaks to a guy who's losing his hair. 40 years ago, I wrote Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, 1954 to 1965. It was a companion volume to a PBS series that was a big hit. And it told the story of the first civil rights movement, as you heard in the title, 54 to 65. So we're talking Brown decision, ending legal segregation in the public schools, to passage of first the Civil Rights Act in 64, and then, very importantly, the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And maybe most famously in that period, Dr. King came to Washington, our home, and had the March on Washington and did the I Have a Dream speech. Fast forward to 2025, Carl, in the publication of this book, New Prize for These Eyes, and the rise of America's second civil rights movement is really about a new movement that is taking place and calling people to recognize we're in the midst of making history again, and don't think that it's going to look just like the first movement. In fact, it's built on the first movement, but quite different. Whereas you had the Great March on Washington in 63, after George Floyd's death in Minneapolis, we had thousands of Black Lives Matter marches across the country with millions of people. And not only that, you could have been in Paris, London, Buenos Aires, and you would have been in a Black Lives Matter march. In the 63 case, everybody had to wait for the morning papers to find out what happened. Now we live in an age of viral media. After George Floyd literally wouldn't have been a thing unless there was a young woman with a cell phone that had the camera running and saw the policeman with the knee on the neck and all that. And now you have viral messages, memes, tweets, or X's, however you want to say it. and it drives a conversation about race and arguments about race that I think constitute a second movement.
Juan, let me ask you. Let me get in. I want to ask you a couple of questions about that because as you're talking, I'm thinking, there is this thing rippled out. I covered cops for years, and I remember initially, I thought as it was a mistake to focus what the police were doing, the excess of the police solely on as a black white issue, as a black civil rights issue, and my thinking was, and the Washington Post, your old paper, did the great work on this. We thought that between 500 and 600 Americans were killed every year by police. Turns out and the Justice Department doesn't require police departments to tell them. There's no national database. The Washington Post actually started doing a database, and it turns out it's like twice as many people as that. And some of them, these notorious cases we know about, are unarmed black men, often, sometimes doing nothing wrong whatsoever. But it turns out a lot of more white people are killed than anybody by police. I thought we have a law enforcement problem. And if we just talk about race, maybe we'll miss the point. But I soon realized this was part of a much larger conversation, to the point where you and I can't even go to a Washington Redskins game anymore because that team doesn't exist. It rippled out into all aspects of this kind of reevaluation of where we were.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks, Carl. You really, I think, are touching on something. Race is hard to discuss because it makes people uncomfortable. But it's interesting to me in terms of the backlash to Black Lives Matter. So much of it is based on the idea that, well, blue lives matter, and we need the police. And if you think back to Rodney King back in the 90s and the thin blue line and all the rest, and people tried to undermine Black Lives Matter by pointing to actual violence. And there's a high rate of violence, unfortunately, in many Black neighborhoods, poor people, disproportionately so. And then they would say, well, what about the Black Lives Matter marches? There was some violence there, overwhelmingly nonviolent, but anytime there was violence, then, looting. Remember what Trump said, the looting starts, the shooting starts, and stuff like that. And so it became that kind of thing where you're thinking, oh, is it a matter of lack of respect for police and social order and threats to our businesses, and that's what we need? Or is it the argument coming from Black Lives Matter that police can be brutal, especially in how they handle people that are seen on the street as threatening, walking around in a hoodie, or he's got his pants hanging down, and people say, well, I don't want to have that discussion. It's kind of touchy, you don't want to say the wrong thing. But in fact, that's what's going on. I mean, you think about Black Lives Matter, it starts with Trayvon Martin, the kid who's in the hoodie, who gets shot by the volunteers security guard, and then the police are slow to arrest him. He's cleared by a jury, and then Black Lives Matter is born. That's the start of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that Carl Cannon is pretty honest to say, let's have that discussion right at the start of this interview.
So who are the heroes of this movement, of the second wave? I see this as a sequel to your first book. And you and I know the heroes. They were starting in my childhood with A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King, of course, and these other people, Ralph Abernathy and some white leaders, Hubert Humphrey. We know these people. Who are going to be the heroes? Who are the iconic people who led this movement, who Americans, who are going to be building statues to 50 years from now?
Yeah, because we're coming up on King birthday holiday, a federal holiday now, as we are speaking. And I must say again, I am so glad that I'm doing this with you, Carl. You really understand this. I don't always appreciate that side of you because I'm thinking politics when I talk to Carl Cannon. But anyway, yes, if you think back to Dr. King, if you think back to Roy Wilkins, John Lewis, the former congressman, was a leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, got his head bashed in and marching for voting rights. You say, oh, these are iconic figures. We all know those figures. So who is it that's the equivalent in your second civil rights movement, Juan? And in fact, what I am hesitant to say is there's no equivalency. The people who started Black Lives Matter are like Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, uh, Opal Tometi. They start online in California talking about that Trayvon Martin's life, however you perceive them as threatening, or he was listening to music in his ear and was too loud, it was rap, you didn't like it. That kid's life mattered. Black lives matter. But they're in California. This movement starts on social media. It's diffuse. They don't want a hierarchy. They don't want what they call the patriarchy, Dr. King type male figure leading. And so they are leading basically a movement that has gone viral and gone international, and people are organizing here and there, but there's no consistency to the message other than we don't like police violence against Black people. And the other answer to you, Carl, is we live in the world of politics. It's hard to get away from Barack Obama as a standout figure in this period, but he's not a civil rights activist. He's a politician. And in the book,
I was gonna ask you about Barack Obama, but before I do that, let me remind our listeners and viewers, talking with Juan Williams, a well-known Washington columnist and commentator, and author of New Prize for These Eyes: The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for Real Clear Politics. Thanks for joining us. Juan, I gotta say, so Barack Obama came. You and I had a discussion about him last year. He's not a product of the civil rights movement in that he's not active in it, but he's the result of it. He's right. And I would sometimes, I finally gave up on this. I would tell my reporters, I would correct their copy. You can't call him the first Black president because his mother was white and and his father was from Africa. So he's actually the perfect African American is the perfect phrase for this guy. But I lost that battle. But Barack Obama comes. He's remember for early in his first term, he struggled to define American exceptionalism. He kind of was dismissive of it, like a college professor, like a liberal college professor. Oh, there's Greek exceptionalism. Well, not really, but first of all, he got his sea legs on that. By the end, he talked about that very eloquently. But the other point was he didn't need to talk about it because he was proof of it.
Oh man, so I think I make the case in this book, obviously, that we're in the midst of a second movement that's having as much impact as the first movement, although people don't seem to recognize that. And it starts with Barack Obama, Carl. It starts with his 2004 speech at the Democratic Convention when he talks about we're not a Black America, white America, gay America, straight America, Asian, Latino. We are the United States of America, he says. And it's very uplifting. And to your point, again, thank you for doing this interview. To your point, he says, my story couldn't have happened in any other country. And talk about American exceptionalism. He is a uplifting, positive, optimistic storyteller about being Black in America. Quite a contrast, Carl, because of your political background. I'm going to say this. Quite a contrast to Jesse Jackson or any of the older civil rights leaders who always spoke about, well, Black people were discriminated or are discriminated against. Think back to segregation, think back to slavery and all of that. And people say, oh, yeah, it's kind of a grim. But here comes Obama, and he's like, no, I am proud to be an American. And this story, my story, couldn't have happened anywhere but America. And people start talking about a post-racial America. He kind of resists that. But then he gets elected because of literally his poster said hope, new hope, right. Obama. Right. And he gets elected. He says, I'm the president of all Americans, but he's still the first Black president, right? How are you going to get away from, as you said with your reporters, you could have even said he's a perfect African American. Is he the first Black president? Okay. But when he gets in office, the powers of race in American society is pretty strong. And so, Black America has expectations. He's going to deliver for them. And then there's resistance and people say, oh, is he the Black president? Is that why we're doing Obamacare? He's giving our tax dollars and our healthcare programs to those poor people, disproportionately the minority. Suddenly, he's having to be somewhat, in some eyes, the Black president. But in his eyes, I think he always thought of himself as the president of the United States.
Well, we have a new president now, and he's got his work cut out for him. Yeah. I would say, reaching out to the people that you're talking about, the people you wrote this book about. Yeah. That's going to do it for us. Juan Williams, thanks for joining us. If you're listening and you like this conversation, even if you don't, run out and buy his book, New Prize for These
Carl,
Eyes,
thank you.
Second American Civil Rights Movement. Juan Williams, thanks for joining us.
Carl, what a pleasure. You surprised me. You know a lot about this topic.
Well, we'll talk about that over a beer. So don't go away. We'll be right back. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on POTUS Channel 124.